Now, Paul, boy, they had it tough in those days. Paul is here, it's the 81st Pennsylvania Infantry, am I right, sir?
Yes, you are.
And you're a private.
Yes.
And he's going to tell you how life was in Civil War as a Pennsylvania private. Paul, thank you very much for showing up. We'll give you a little applaud and get you started. Thank you, sir.
Thanks, everybody. Like Joe said, my name is Paul Maddox, and I'm local, live in Oliphant. I was born and raised in Music, moved to Oliphant when I got married. And always loved history, always loved being around history, reading about it. You know, especially the war, Civil War, Revolutionary, and all that. A few years ago, I really started getting involved with the Civil War and reading more and more, and really honing in on the Pennsylvania units that fought. And decided, after looking into it, that I wanted to get into the reenacting side of it. I'm glad I did it. It's turned out to be a ton of fun. When I wanted to, looking around to see which units were around here, I got on the internet, there's tons of information, and I found that the local unit that was doing reenacting was the 81st Pennsylvania Volunteer Infantry, and in particular Company K. The regiment was formed in 1861 from President Lincoln's call for soldiers to come down. The regiment was raised 10 companies. Each company had 100 men, and they were usually raised around towns and specific. 6 of the companies in the 81st came from Philadelphia. The other 4 companies came from Carbon and Luzerne counties. Company K was raised almost exclusively around Eckley. And every year Eckley has a big weekend where they celebrate that, and we go down. It's a real nice time. So we were raised, our company, out of Eckley. In August of 1861, we formed up and took a train down to Easton, where we got acclimated with the rest of our companies. Like I said, there's 10 companies in the regiment. Each company had on paper 100 men, mostly privates, usually 4 corporals, 2 or 3 sergeants, and then the commander was usually a captain, and he was elected by the company. And usually somebody everybody was familiar with, you know, maybe had some military experience or had a popular job, you know, where he was around and open to more things.
Paul, can I interrupt you now?
Yes.
This is my first presentation for the entire year, and I goofed. Normally what we do, we have a short, like you're doing right now, and then we invite everybody to get the pizza while it's hot, and then they all can go to where the restroom is, back up there. They can go to the little boys' room or girls' room, and then we'll come back and finish. We just want to get them interested in what you're doing and what you see. So if we can interrupt and get whoever it is, I don't know, Esther, wherever you have.
Over here, right where I am.
Who's I am? Oh, Dorothy, where Dorothy is.
You didn't recognize me.
I heard the voice before.
For 40 years.
50 years. All right, so let's take a 50.
Pennsylvania in the wheat field. At that time, we had 200 men total in the 81st, 25 in Company K, and the 81st suffered 61 casualties that day. So we had our share of casualties.
For your replacement, would they come from the same places that
Yes.
was originally
Yes. That's
organized
a
from?
good question. I was just going to mention, through the course of the entire Civil War, 163 men came through the ranks of Company K, the majority coming from Eckley and the surrounding areas. We had a few from Philly and some surrounding areas. But we had 163 men total serve in Company K, and we had 105 casualties of that number. Sickness, captured, killed, and wounded. So that's 64% of the total that served in Company K became a casualty at some point during the war. So very devastating and felt everywhere. So that's just a little brief history of the 81st and who I represent when we go out to reenactments. What I want to do, when you watch a Civil War movie, you put Gettysburg in, Gods and Generals, even the Red Badge of Courage. The movie focuses mostly on the fighting. Everybody sees fighting, loves shooting the guns. But you never see or hear how they got there, what they're wearing, why they were issued that, and how that all came to be. So I'm just going to give you a little bit of background on all that information, why we wear what we wear and why we're given it. The Union Army was outfitted and equipped by the government. And that's why after Bull Run, after the first battle of Bull Run in 1861, there was confusion because a lot of the Confederate units were blue, and a lot of the northern state units that went down had gray on. So there's a lot of confusion on the battlefield. After Bull Run, the government decided that they're going to make everybody wear the same uniform, and it was going to make it easier to distinguish your units on the field. So they went with the navy blue and sky blue trousers. So I'm just going to go through everything real quick.
What was before? They didn't have uniforms?
They had uniforms, but it was more a hodgepodge from the states would put it together,
Oh, okay.
or maybe you just put on whatever you
It
had.
wasn't one color?
No,
Oh,
no.
So you didn't know who it was?
Exactly, that
Oh,
led to confusion, and that's one of the reasons that the Union lost. There was a couple points where they had a tactical advantage, saw a unit of blue coming on their flank, assumed it was more of their men, turned out to be Confederates, and that happened. So they wanted to do away with that. So when our unit got down to Washington in October, we were issued uniforms from the federal government. And started with the hat. And every enlisted person, the corporals and sergeants, was given a hat. And they called them forage caps. It was a soft wool material with a leather band and a leather brim. And the reason they call them forage caps, a lot of times on the march, as you marched up and down Virginia and the East Coast, you were always hungry, always looking to steal food, a snack. Apples you'd pick, cherries from trees, eggs you'd steal. And what the hat allowed you to do was to take the leather band and turn it around this way and then fill your hat up with food, forage, and then you could carry it around, a little pail. And then you could strap that right over your bayonet and then tie up your hands.
That's pretty good.
So that's why they're called forage caps. And of course, it's wool. Wool uniforms, they were issued for durability, not because they were nice and cool in the summertime. They held up good, and they lasted a long time, and they were easy to make. The next item that the federal government gave you was a shirt. Typical of the shirts that you were given was, all the shirts at that time were pullover. Nothing had buttons completely up and down. You had a 4-button shirt. They could have a little collar on it, or they could be collarless, depending. The government issued ones were white or off-white, like a cream-colored. If you were lucky enough to have somebody at home that could sew, they would send you and could send you shirts, and I'll show you what I'm wearing later, that had a little bit more of a pattern or a style or a color. You know, white on a battlefield isn't exactly what you want to be wearing. But that was typical of the shirt, long sleeves.
One size fits all.
Pretty much, yeah, you didn't get much size choice.
Bandage, the white shirt, bandage, they use it.
They could, yeah, I mean, it was a good heavy cotton that they were made out of, so yeah, you could use it for that. Next you had, underneath your wool trousers, they issued kind of like long johns. It's a light cotton or muslin material again with the buttons. And I always had this little V-cut in the back to help with sizing. They didn't care too much about size. You got something and you hoped that it was, your size or something you could wear with some rope. This is real comfortable reenacting to wear under the wool pants. They get a little bit itchy, a little bit hot. So it's nice to have these on. And again, have issued those. Then you were given your socks. Very important, keep your feet dry and comfortable in your shoe. They were wool or cotton. These are a thinner cotton pair. These are patterned after a pattern from 1862, so they're cut exactly like they would have been cut
One pair?
back then. You were given one pair to start with. For all of the uniform items, the North especially was able to make good throughout the war on issuing replacement items. So you got, once a year you're issued an extra pair of trousers and shirt and socks and boots especially. So they made good on it. You could also wear, and I'm wearing a thicker wool sock, make it a little more comfortable in the shoe. The shoes were very uncomfortable. Next, you were issued your jacket, wool jacket. This is called a sack coat, and it's a sack coat. It's supposed to fit like a sack of potatoes. Loose, long, comfortable, not much to it. 4 buttons, no outside pockets. There is one inside pocket that you would keep personal items in, right inside here, letters from home, maybe a picture if you had something, little snack, and during the fighting, keep extra rounds in there. The sack coat was so popular and so comfortable that a lot of officers, as the war went on, got rid of the long, 20-button jackets with the thick, stiff collars that they wore and went to a sack coat just because it was more comfortable in the field and allowed you a greater range of motion. In camp, one of the things that you could do, you could get comfortable if you weren't on parade or during drill, but you were required, because of the morality of the time, you keep your jacket on, you could unbutton it up to your neck button. This was acceptable in camp to be comfortable and to do some work in. Next, we had the wool trousers. No belt. You were issued braces to keep them up, suspenders. And you had 2 front pockets, again, that you could keep snacks, food, and any personal items in as well. No back pockets or anything like that. And then the shoes, the brogans that they were called during the Civil War, was just 2 pieces of hard leather sewn together on a leather sole, sized. When you went through the line, you hoped you got something that was similar to the size you needed so that you didn't have to go and find somebody to trade with. And the shoes at the time of the Civil War, they didn't make right or left. You got 2 pair of the same, and just by putting them on and hopefully remembering which one you put on which foot would form after they got wet and dry and weathered to that side. So it was a one size shoe. It made it good if you had to get a replacement on a battlefield. You can just grab any shoe. It didn't have to be a right or a left. And unfortunately, a lot of times you could go to the medical tents when the doctors were performing their amputations after a battle, and go to the pile of feet or legs that were usually outside the tent and look for a shoe or a boot there as a replacement. So it
Did you
did
have
have...
a leather, a metal heel?
Yeah, a lot of times you could opt for a metal heel plate, and it just allowed your shoe to last a little bit longer. It's especially important for reenactment because you're on a lot of pavement now that they didn't have back then, roads and sidewalks and stuff like that.
Not too probably.
Yeah.
How
So
long
it-
did a good pair of shoes usually last?
In the Civil War, to get your issued brogans, if you could get them for about 8 to 10 months, that was with all the marching and the weather, you were doing pretty good. And typically, you were issued every 6 months if the supply could catch up to you, a new pair of shoes. Very uncomfortable at first, but once they're broken in, they're a comfortable shoe, so you'd like to keep them as long as you could. Usually there were settlers that traveled with the unit, and you could go there if you were really comfortable with your shoes, and maybe they could doctor them up if they needed new soles or something, and try and keep them as long as you can. So basically, this is the standard issued uniform that the government gave. Everybody was outfitted in Company K. We all had the same uniforms, looked exactly the same. Besides the uniform, you were given some equipment and then your personal items. Also your tent. Everything that you see here that was issued to the Civil War soldier, it was your responsibility to carry it. Once we left Washington, Company K and the 81st didn't travel on train at all. We marched everywhere we went, with the exception of a few boat rides down the Potomac and back up again. So When we left Washington in high spirits and, full of vinegar and ready to go, we didn't mind carrying everything in our backpack and our shelter half and our gum blanket and our, wool blanket and extra clothes. By the time you got done with your first battle, you were getting rid of as much stuff as you can. And basically you just wanted to carry this, the equipment, and your rifle. And that was enough weight. You didn't want to get bogged down marching all over Virginia with a frying pan and a shelter half. It was summertime. What do you need a tent for? You'd sleep outside. So as the Union Army moved, you could usually tell where they went just by following the trail and seeing all the accoutrements left on the side and all the equipment left on the side. And later on, if you want to come up, you can just see some of the personal items that I use when I go reenacting. Now, each soldier was issued one half of a dog tent, a shelter half, and it was up to you if you wanted to have a tent. When you stopped for camp, you would find a buddy in your company. You would button your two halves together and get a tent. You'd get some sticks from nearby, cut them down, set them up, drape your canvas tent over it, and you're set to go. Reenacting now, I can't imagine how uncomfortable it had to be to put two people in this tent. The tent is 68 inches long, so at the Civil War time it fit, but if you're a little bit taller today, you either have to put your head or your feet out and make that choice. And then you were issued a gum blanket, which is a piece of canvas, hard black on one side, that you would put down on the ground when you slept to keep the moisture from the ground getting into your uniform. A lot of times what soldiers would do with their gum blanket would either cut a little slit in it and then use it as a poncho if it rains. You just drape it over and keep as much of your uniform dry as you can. Anybody that's ever gotten wool wet, you know that it doesn't dry very well. It's heavier and
Stinks.
stinks. A little bit of an odor to it. As far as the equipment goes, and this is kind of important besides the uniform, because this is stuff you use every day. You were issued a cartridge box. Cartridge box was where you kept your cartridges. Usually black leather, big US buckle on it, latched underneath so when you ran it didn't flip the top open and you'd end up losing all your rounds. When you opened the first flap, there was another flap inside, and this helped to keep rain off your cartridges. You didn't want wet gunpowder. You flipped that up, and then you got your rounds. There were 2 tins inside that you would keep your rounds in. A cartridge box would hold 40 rounds, so whenever you were marching, you always had 40 rounds. The front pouch right here, you would keep any kind of tools or cleaners for your gun or any, round paper in here. So you kind of use this to carry all of your rounds.
Why do you call them cartridges? They're not.
No, that's what they called them back then. They referred to them as cartridges back in the day.
That's before their time.
And it's got the eagle brass plate on it. If you were right-handed, you wore your cartridge box to your right side, and kind of over the back of your hip. The next item you'd put on would be your issued belt with the U.S. issued belt buckle. On the belt, you kept your bayonet and you kept your cap pouch. Okay, put that on. The reason this went on over your cartridge box was once you got this on, if you ran or anything, by keeping the belt on, it kept your cartridge box in place so that when you had to stop and look for a round, you didn't have to feel where it moved to. You knew it was always going to be right there. You would make sure then that your cap pouch was right in front to the right down here, and then your bayonet hung on your left side. So that as you're watching the enemy or watching anything else, you didn't have to look to see where anything was. You could load just by feel. Next, you had your issued canteen, and one of the bigger misconceptions with canteens is this color, this jean cloth material, which was a blend of wool and cotton, was this color. This was U.S. government issued. Only late in the war did they go to a blue, and it was a navy blue. But typically, when canteens were first issued, it was covered with this brown material. It had a leather or thin cotton strap and a cork stopper. And it was stainless steel, or it was tin rather, held together, the two halves held together with beeswax. And
Did you say 10?
tin, yeah. So you had your canteen. And then the last item that you were issued with was your haversack, which again was a canvas material painted with a tar, again to keep it waterproof. On your haversack, this was used to carry all your food rations. When you left camp and you were going on a campaign, you were typically issued 3 days ration. That could be pork, coffee beans, maybe a handful of vegetables. Everything you had went into your haversack. And after a while, they would develop a very nice odor from all of the food. You had your tin cup, which you carried everywhere. You know, basically, this equipment is what you made sure you kept all the time. So you can always get water. The tin cups were nice because you could put them right in the fire, and nothing would happen, and cook. As long as you kept liquid in there, you could cook a little homemade soup or warm up coffee. You had your plate, which most of the time looked just like pie plates. That's what they were called. And these are nice because anything you ate, you didn't have to worry about spilling off the sides. They did make flat plates as well. It was kind of up to the individual soldier what you preferred. And then you had your silverware. This is one of the few items that I carry that's authentic to the time period in the Civil War.
Where do you get your stuff, from Regimental Quartermaster?
All different sites on the web. I've gotten some things from there. I have my 3-pronged fork, my knife, and then my spoon. So that was my setup for eating. Like I said, you would carry everything that you wanted to eat. All your food went into your haversack. Usually you put your cup right on the buckle, throw that over, now you're ready to go. You've got some weight on, but you still have range of motion. You can run, you can move, and everything is going to stay right where it is. And then the last item issued was your musket. This is a reproduction of the Springfield 1861, right down to the stamp markings on the gun. This is made by a company in Italy. There's 2 brands that make the Springfield. The most popular weapon during the Civil War. There's over 1,500,000 of them produced. The North had most of them. The South would get them any way they could, usually on the battlefields after a battle. If they were, especially early in the war, since they were victorious, they would go around and gather all the weapons that they could. This Springfield musket weighs 9.5 pounds. It's got some nice weight to it. And it's 56 inches long. And this weapon is the first weapon that the government produced because it's rifled inside. It was accurate, and it gave greater distance than any weapon before it. It's the first gun that the government produced where they actually put sights on it. Prior to the 1861 Springfield, there weren't sights on mass-produced guns for the Army because they didn't have the range or the accuracy. The gun is set for 100 yards. You had a 300 and a 500 yard range sight on it as well. The gun was accurate to 300 yards for massed infantry. At up to 600 yards, you had a good chance of hitting either a horse or the man on the horse. So even though the weapon gave greater accuracy and distance, the movements of the men were still Revolutionary War. You still fought in a straight line, shoulder to shoulder. Now that the gun that you were given when you got into camp, you were given some basic drill. And basically the thing you wanted to learn was how to march with it. There are a few commands, when you're marching 50, 60 miles, 9.5 pounds feels like 900 pounds at the end. So you would learn a couple different stands to march with the rifle, the musket. Typically when you fell in, when the first call was sounded on the bugle, and everybody got your gear on, and you looked for the corporal, he would be the first person. He would stand in line, and the command was then to fall in on the corporal. When you fell in, you carried your rifle at order arms, which was stocked on the ground and gripped between the second and third ring. The sergeant would then come down, have you address the ranks, where you would make sure that you were in a straight line and you were shoulder to shoulder with the people next to you. And then he would have you stand in 2 ranks, front rank and rear rank. And then he would have each person in that rank count off 1, 2, 1, 2. And that became your file, so it was rank and file. He would then have you shoulder arms, which was probably the most common command. And when you see a lot of pictures from the soldiers in the Civil War, that's how they're standing. At shoulder arms, you would lift the musket with your right hand, grab it with your left, and then you take your thumb and forefinger around the trigger guard, hold it at arm's length, and then push the barrel into your shoulder, and you're at shoulder arms. Then you would typically start your march, and this is how you start it. If you had a good sergeant that was considerate, he would often give commands to change how you held the gun during march, and it made it a lot easier. Your arm didn't get as tired. So a lot of times the other 2 popular commands were to right shoulder arms, in which you would bring the musket up, turn it, and place it so that the hammer and trigger were over your right shoulder, and it's up and it's angled a little bit up to my left. Because the gun is so long, I have to be careful I wouldn't hit the guy behind me. So it's up and cocked a little bit to your left. And you march like this for a little while, and then it would go back to shoulder arms. And then the other command that they gave was to support arms, which was up in front of you, turned, and then placed so that your arm was underneath the hammer and supported the weight of the gun, and you did a rough V and held your hand here. If you go to Gettysburg, to the new visitor center in the cafeteria, there's a big picture above where you order your food. If you look up there, there's one of the soldiers is standing at support arms, and he's a little looser with the V. But surprisingly, it's a very comfortable way to hold 9.5 pounds.
And it's a lot.
And yeah, and you can march a little bit with this. If you stayed at support arms for a while, you were allowed to bring your right arm over and give it a little bit of rest by grabbing the butt of the right musket. And you go back down to shoulder arms and then order arms.
How come years ago you used to see people with the bayonet up and with the bayonet on?
When they marched, especially if you knew you were going into battle, the commander would give the order to put the bayonet on. What it was a kind of an intimidating factor. When you have a gleaming bayonet on your rifle and you have a line of 1,000 men in your regiment, it looks pretty impressive and pretty scary.
Yeah, it does.
And it gives you some nice reach as well. So when you're marching and you see the sun shining off a glistening bayonet. Now, you typically wouldn't want to go into a battle with the bayonet because it did hinder your loading procedure a little bit. So, but if you had to, if you knew it was going to be anything, you would keep it. Then there.
If you were left-handed, did you do just the opposite, or did you have to stay uniform with everything?
You could, once it got going, but everything was made to be fired from the
Right-handed.
right.
Okay.
So a lot of them would just learn.
What was the average age
In the Civil War,
of that, like, that?
our Company K, when we were first formed in August of '61, the average age of the soldier in Company K was 25.
Really?
Yeah, and most of them were miners that decided to get out of the mines and to try the adventure of soldiering. Right. The replacements that we got were older, okay, as they started feeding replacements in.
Did they have a lot of blacks in the unit?
We didn't have any. No, we didn't have any. We had, as far as I've been able to tell, the second colonel of the 81st had a couple of servants that traveled with him, but there were no, throughout the entire war, the 81st didn't have any black soldiers. And the next thing I'm going to show is how to load the musket and a couple of commands for firing that you would do as well. Now the manual that you would follow, either Hardy's or Casey's manuals, drilled you to load and fire in 9 steps. There were 9 independent steps that you would do to fire. When you're 300 yards away from the Confederates, you're not going to load and fire in 9 steps. You're going to do it as quick as you can. During the Civil War, the average soldier could fire 3 times, load and fire 3 times in a minute. And I think that's impressive because I can't do that. I can do 2. And that's, when nobody's shooting at you, there's no noise or anything. So I can't imagine what they must have done. So you know that you're facing the enemy. Your commander, captain, would march you up to your prescribed point in the Union line. If you were fighting by the regiment, your whole regiment would be strung out in 2 ranks, your front rank and your rear rank. And you'd march to your designated spot, usually with the shoulder arms, and you'd halt, and the command would be to load your musket. At that point, you put it down with the rammer facing you. You would draw your cartridge, you'd bite the tip of the paper off, they were just hand tied, and you would pour the powder in. When we reenact and use black powder, we use between 65 and 75 grains. They used a little bit more during the war in Iran. And you would pour the powder in. Then you would squeeze in the mini ball that was on top of the powder, and that would go into the rifle. And you'd squeeze it down so that it was just inside the barrel. And you would draw your rammer, and you would push everything down. When you were loaded, you'd have about that much of the rammer sticking out. You knew that you had a good compact load, and you'd take your rammer back out. Now, if you felt that you were going to be in a position where you're going to do some fighting and not around and march, instead of taking the time to put your rammer back in, you would just stick it in the ground in front of you so that it was easy to get to. You
How
weren't going
tight was that going down? Was it a hard push?
Yeah, it was a fairly hard push. The mini ball fit pretty tight. Now, there was a little bit of space. The idea was,
consistent in their size on the mini ball?
from what I heard, fairly consistent. You never got one, I never read of one that was too big.
Probably the rifling made it hard to push down.
Yeah, that was so then you would get that all the way down and withdraw your rammer and stick it in the ground. You wanted to make sure that rammer came out, and that was the only thing you had to load your musket. If you forgot, which happened, and you fired, besides the mini ball, that ram would go flying too. And that was it. And you'd have to look for another one or wait until one became available. At that point, you bring the gun back up, you go to half cock, and you take out a cap. Which was brass or copper, and you put it on to the nipple of the gun on there. And the Springfield musket, when it was at half cock, there was no way that that would go off. It's the term going off at half cock. It wouldn't go off. So you put your cap on, and then you go back to shoulder arms to start with, because your captain, who was behind the line, walking back and forth, giving encouragement and giving orders, had no way to tell if you didn't do that, if you were loaded or not. By going back to shoulder arms, him standing behind you, once he saw everyone's musket come up, he knew that the company was loaded and ready to go. So you would stand and await the command to fire. At that point, it would be, he had a couple options, and depending on how smart he was, he would vary his type of fire. If there was still a good distance between the Confederates and your unit, he would try and get off one or two volleys of the entire company. So his command would be company ready, which at that point, the manual told you to make a T with your feet, keep your left foot planted and draw your right foot back, and raise the gun to just about mid-chest, still at the half cock. At the command aim, as you drew your rifle up, you would go to full cock, and then you would wait, and then it would be fire. You'd fire, and then you'd wait for the next command, because sometimes you would go back down to if you're going to move somewhere, or there's going to be another fire command. So then you'd say load, and come back down again, and go through the whole process. Now, by keeping your equipment where it was, you can keep an eye on the enemy to see what he was doing without having to look and see. Reach in, grab, pour, cap, up, and then ready again. After you got off a volley or two by company, which was impressive, a lot of smoke, a lot of noise, and a good shot going out, if the enemy or if you got closer, he had to be a little more careful than how he was going to do the next firing, because if he issued the command again to company fire, and the Confederates at that time then did a charge, the whole company was out of bullets. You probably couldn't load quick enough. You'd hope maybe you can get the bayonet on, or you just have to get ready for slugging contest. So some of the options that they had was to fire by rank. So he would give the command, and the front rank would go up to ready, aim, fire, and then load. You would come down to load. The rear rank at that point would then stick their guns through, and you would get between the second and third ring, typically would be by your ear. So that's what you're getting now while you're loading. As soon as the first rank then went up to shoulder arms, the rear rank would fire. That way you're always covered with a rank loaded in case the enemy tried to advance on you. The other option you had was to fire by file. So again, the first man and the second man in each file would fire two, and it would ripple down the line. So by the time it got to the end of the line, the first two guys were loaded and ready to go again. Again, that offered you the advantage of having loaded weapons in line in case the enemy tried to advance or outflank. Like I said, a good captain understood the situation he was in and would adjust his fire to, accompany or counter anything that the enemy might do.
Would they ever say range, such and such range?
If you had skirmishers out, typically they would go out to a 300-yard mark, and then it'd come back as the enemy came, so you can watch them. And what the commander of the skirmishers would try and do is stop at 300, 200, 100. Kind of give you a gauge, but there was nothing that you had. I mean, a good shot, you could maybe see the Confederates and gauge that to be
Find out what your sites,
Oh.
you can follow the sites.
No, you're lucky to just get it down there.
You can see.
Now, a lot of times what happened, especially when you got the cap put on, if the cap didn't fit tight there, when you brought it up to shoulder arms, the cap might fall off. It might not fit on there right. So when you went up and you did your firing, with all the smoke and the noise, and this happens even at reenactments, you don't always tell if your gun went off. So then you would come back down and you would load again, and you could end up putting a whole nother round in there.
Oh, that's not good.
No. At Gettysburg, when the battle was over, the Union started going and cleaning up the casualties and the equipment left around. They found about 35,000 muskets they took from the field. Of those 35,000, 11,000 were unloaded. They were empty. 24,000 were loaded. Of the 24,000, 6,000 had one charge. 12,000 had two charges, and the other 6,000 had between 3 and 10 charges in it. And they recovered one musket that had 22 charges in it. Now, I don't know who was doing that, but with 22, you're going to get the rammer in about that far. And if you don't think that there's something wrong, and that's as far as you can ram.
I sure would want to pull the trigger on that one.
No. Barrels would split, explode.
What caliber is that?
This is 58 caliber.
58?
58.
During the Civil War, I was told years ago that they even used wood in them when they ran out of the shot.
Especially the Confederates, near the end of the war, couldn't make good on losses, material, equipment, anything like that. You know, the picture of the guy without the shoes and stuff. Yeah,
Can you imagine getting hit with a piece of wood? You got slivers in your behind.
Way to go, Howard.
No, I mean, you hear, I heard these stories. That's the only reason why I'm asking.
Yep, yeah, and that was absolutely the truth, that they would do anything and fit anything into the shoes. Now, the mini ball that was used, lead, typically, whatever else they could come up with, hollowed on the bottom through these rings. The idea being that, once you got it rammed down, when you shot, the hollow end would expand a little bit, grabbing the rifling in the barrel, sending it on its way. Now, the 58 caliber had
That's a distance though to shoot.
yeah, the muzzle velocity was 950 feet a second coming out of this. You can see and you can feel when you come up the weight of one of these rounds. You can just imagine entering your body and hitting the bone, just snapping it inside, or catching it across where it would just start tumbling around inside. I mean, it's amazing when you look at these and you look at the medical services that were available at the time, that anybody that got shot lived, and some of the horrific wounds that they got and were able to carry on with them. It was just amazing.
They used round balls too, didn't
They did, but they were phased out because they didn't give you as good of accuracy as the mini ball. And when the government, the North, started doing their cartridges, they went with the mini ball. So pretty exclusive. You'd still find that in the South, again, because you had the shortages as the war went on. You started going into your home stock or marching from your home. You took the rifle over the fireplace. May have been a flintlock, may have been a 69 smooth bore with the round ball, and that's what you did. Again, you try and grab something the first chance you had. Grab the cartridge, the caps, and continue from there. Like I said, the cartridge box held 40 rounds. If you knew you're going into battle, the Union soldier would carry between 60 and 80 rounds, and you would just shove them in any pocket, any space that you had. You'd fill your haversack up with them, your front pockets, your coat pocket, wherever you could. You want to carry as many rounds as you can. You want to be on the battlefield and have to rely on, using it as a baseball bat or even your bayonet. You want to make sure you have enough rounds to hold the enemy off. So, and if you were lucky, you were able to go through the whole war unscathed, you came home, you were discharged, you came home, and you went back to farming or whatever it was you didn't work in the mines. During the war, as a private in Company K, I was paid $13 a month. In 1863, that went up to $16 a month. So if I was lucky, I got paid every 4 months, kept a couple dollars for myself, and would send most of it home to supplement whoever I had left behind to pay for farming or clothes, food, anything like that. Didn't keep much of it at all. The Army was supposed to provide for everything you needed. So, that's-
The officers didn't carry rifles, right? They
No,
had,
the officer had a sword and a pistol. As a last-ditch item, the pistols were very inaccurate, very hard to load. The sword was ornamental at best. That's why during the fight, he would typically stand behind you and just
he was a better target too. They,
issue words of encouragement. Yeah, you didn't want the captain to stand next to you when you were fighting. So, like I said, everything that I carry is up here. Everything that I wear and use is authentic in the fact that it was patterned after patterns that still survive from the Civil War. My sack coat is the same sack coat that is on display at the Civil War Museum in Harrisburg. It was
Have you shot that rifle?
many times, yeah. Now, again, only in reenacting, so I'm only using 65. And the smoke and the smell and the feel, when you're packed, even if there's just 15 of us in a
Have
line.
you tried it with the ammo in it? No? Why? You afraid to or what?
Well, I'm working my way up to that. But it's impressive. I can't imagine when you had 1,000 men on the line.
Call me when you shoot it, will you? I'll give you a number.
Okay.
Can you imagine, though, you said 18, you're talking 1,800 feet distance to shoot at somebody.
Yeah.
At a gun like that, that's absolutely unbelievable
Yeah.
today.
Yeah.
1,800 feet.
and would still kill the person with enough velocity.
600 yards.
Yeah, and have
That's
enough velocity.
absolutely Unbelievable.
And would still have enough velocity to kill the person.
Yeah. When you think about that distance, wow, that's unbelievable.
It's a big piece of lead too going down.
Yes, it is.
downrange.
Is that a Damascus barrel?
I don't know.
Damascus
couldn't be
barrel,
Damascus.
long,
If it was Damascus, it'd blow apart.
No, that's Gibson, right?
Yeah, it's grooved.
yeah, so, well, they could still rifle with Damascus barrel,
It's a rifle barrel, yeah.
but it was, the whole barrel was one piece of steel and then drilled, I think.
I don't know.
Springfield, right?
Yeah,
Damascus
Springfield.
barrel was taking a piece of metal and wrapping it around an anvil and welding it as it goes.
No, that's not Damascus, no.
Did anybody know Frank Tedesco? Yeah.
Yes.
Well, when he went to school, probably around 1910, the Civil War veterans used to come in and tell him about their battles.
Wow.
And that impressed him very much, and he went to collect those guns all his life. And he always wanted the best barrels. He used to have a little way of looking down the barrel. If it wasn't cleaned, or if it was fired and it wasn't clean, he wouldn't. He offered me what he had left before he died, but I had no interest in it, because I said I'd probably kill myself. His nephews.
Oh, okay.
Right.
So what's a Damascus rifle? I don't understand.
You just said it was,
You start with a rod, a hard rod, and the blacksmith would get a strip of metal, heat it up, and he'd wind it along that rod, and he'd hammer it. A lot of your shotguns are Damascus barrels. You have to be careful, because they're made for black powder. They weren't made for the high powder. I guess that was black powder.
yeah.
The only thing you didn't discuss is how they see. There was so much smoke.
You're looking, once you got the smoke, you were just firing in the direction that you started firing in, or if you happen to catch a flash, on the other side, that's what you aimed for. At that point, you're firing with the noise. You're just going through the motions.
So this outfit you were with had like 1,000 men when they started, and as you said, through all these things happened, so that there were only 200 and some
Yep.
soldiers at the end.
Yep.
Were these guys, what would they do if the guy next to them got shot? Or if, like you said, you didn't have the captain standing next to you, but
You would just, I mean, you hope you had the nerve to just stay there and keep firing.
you weren't required to give any aid or anything else. Your
No,
job was
no.
just to keep shooting at the enemy.
Keep shooting. Now, if he was a, someone that was a dear friend from home, you would maybe try and help if you could, but during the heat of the battle, you just had one thought, and that was, if you were firing enough, maybe you were gonna be spared.
And if these guys could load 3 times in a minute, I mean, they'd go through those 40 rounds in no time.
Yeah, typically in 12 minutes, you could empty your cartridge box.
I was looking at your mess kit. That knife is pretty dull. It's like a butter knife. Do you
Right.
have to carry like a pocket knife or something?
Yeah, I have a pocket knife. A lot of times they would get rid of the pocket knife and the butter knife and just carry like a steak knife today, like a sharper knife, and use it for both items. Sometimes they would have hatchets too.
The other question I had, there's nothing on you that says you're from the 81st. If you ever got mixed up in another group, how would you tell the unit?
During the Civil War, you were given badge to signify the corps you were in, and then typically you would have 81 sewn, maybe on the top of your forage cap, maybe on your canteen.
But not on your sack coat or anything?
No, and because of reenacting, the 81st is part of a bigger unit called the Mifflin Guard, and we have units, we have the 33rd New Jersey, the 26th Pennsylvania from Philadelphia. We get together with a lot of units. Because we might portray a different unit, we typically don't sew any permanent unit markings on so that we can fit it in another unit.
But in the Civil War, you would have had
Yes,
something.
yeah, and especially the Corps badge to signify, where you belong, where your unit was. We were the 81st Pennsylvania was the 2nd Corps, 1st Division. At Gettysburg, we were under Hancock's Corps.
Would you have dog tags or anything to identify the soldiers?
No, a lot of the soldiers did, because after the first couple battles, and they saw what happened to people that died, somewhere inside their uniform they would sew on a tag that had their name and where they were from, so that if anything happened, they would get returned to Eckley or wherever they happened to be from. But that was up to the soldier. They didn't have a standard issue of identification.
So it's conceivable that many soldiers were killed without ever identifying their bodies.
Yes, yes.
Many times.
And a lot of times, you were buried on the field you fell. Part of the Mifflin Guard is the 33rd New Jersey. They have a gentleman, 2 gentlemen that out of their own pocket are in Georgia getting the remains of 2 men from the original 33rd that fell in battle down there. They have the ancestors' permission, and they're getting their remains dug up to bring back to New Jersey. So yeah, I mean, you had a good chance of never being returned or even identified, depending on where you fell. Usually, if your side held the battlefield afterwards, you had a better chance, because if the South held the ground, they would identify their own men, and the Union soldiers would just be put in a common trench grave, unmarked, marked with the headstone, but not individual. So,
This gentleman.
Gettysburg Cemetery has a whole section of unknowns.
yeah. And there's still, if you pick up the paper at Gettysburg and other places, they'll still stumble across. Just November or December, they found the remains of a Union soldier from New York at Antietam. A guy happened to be walking through the field and saw something bent down, and bones had turned up. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of unknown, and still finding people.
Was the forge hat also called a kepi or something like that, K-E-P-I?
A kepi was a little bit different. Didn't come out until the end of the war. It had a rolled top. It was shorter and firm. It didn't fill out like a forge cap.
Okay.
Typically didn't have, yeah.
Did it do the same thing,
No.
unfold as the carriage? Well, was it a little more armored or something, or?
No, the kepis typically had more ornamentation sewn on,
Oh.
so officers, cavalry, artillerymen would go with the kepi, but the guy that's out there living off the land would try and keep a forage cap
Mhm.
for the practicality. Not much glitter,
No,
you know,
no.
on the privates. But I like it, I like everything about it, it's a lot of fun. And the people you meet when you're out is, because everybody's got the same interest. So it's really neat at night just to sit around.
What did you use to brush your teeth?
Good question. We had a lovely bone-handled toothbrush with more bristles than you could brush a horse's mouth with that. And then the toothpaste was actually powder. And it smells good, it's minty. You'd put a little bit of powder in your hand, dump a little water from your canteen, get a paste, rub your toothbrush in it, get it on your bristles and brush. Want to brush your teeth?
No, so what's that silver thing?
This,
Yeah.
a lot of, if you had small personal items that you wanted to keep from getting bent, like Tylenol or anything for reenacting, anything original that they had small, they'd keep in tins, cigars in this one. Anything that was small that might get bent or broke, if you stuck in a pocket, you could keep in a tin in your knapsack, and keep it from getting...
Your Rolex, let's say.
Yeah, exactly.
And what did you also use to keep yourself entertained? Like, what do you...
If you were lucky, someone from your company maybe would play harmonica, maybe a banjo, if they, especially early in the war when they would still carry it, a fife, cards, very popular to play cards during the entire Civil War. That was popular, especially at payday.
And they smoked, I guess, that tobacco and...
Yep, and coffee. Coffee, huge. Anytime you stopped, there was fires going and people making coffee.
And what did you read to?
If we were, near Washington in a safe camp, we would have people come down and they would bring newspapers so you could catch up on what was going on. Letters, if you're lucky enough to get letters from home, you can read those and keep them in your pocket. Maybe, read them 50 times every time you had a chance to take it out.
What about a Bible?
Yes, if you had a Bible or a prayer book or anything like that, you could read that too. I have one. There's a lot of times that, different religious groups would follow the troops and, distribute Bibles or prayer books or hymnals. And they would have services as often as they could.
Anything else?
You're welcome.
They used to race lice. They put lice on the plates. The kid ran the Civil War, and they said one guy was winning all the time. He used to heat the plate. And they'd run off fast when he was winning.
Amazing.
Yeah. Feel free to come up and touch, feel, anything you want, any other questions you want, but thank you for...
Yeah, thank you very much.